And again, some of you have not actually been using questions. Remember to follow the format of answer, comment, respond, and question. Okay, so let's go to the first question. Um, this is Layali. With freedom of speech, at least in the US, can banning words actually happen? Well, it can do, but like here and most places, it's not always easy to do. It's not always easy to prosecute types of speech um, in um, in a court. So, for example, there are different exceptions in the United States to freedom of speech. For example, speech which is inciting others to violence, false statements, obscenity, especially to do with child pornography, um, fighting words or offensive speech, which no doubt would involve racist speech as well. Um, Speech owned by others, you can't actually use what other people have said, and then other kinds of situations. So yeah, so legally there are exceptions to free speech, but it's the prosecution of offensive speech, of hate speech, which is not always easy. Alex K says, what has Britain done to try to stop fans from using these very racist and offensive chants? Well, there is an actual law, and that's the 1991 Under the Football Offences Act. And under that, you can prosecute fans for racist and obscene chanting. Again, the problem, as we've seen, of course, is that it's very hard to prove whether a particular chant is racist or otherwise. There have been some successful prosecutions, but it's not always the case that it's an easy thing to do. What usually happens is that the role of policing chanting falls to each particular club. Um, and so stewards would have recorders, maybe video cameras, where they record groups of fans chanting offensive chants, and then take measures to exclude those fans from coming to games. In Scotland, there's a particular use of sectarian chanting, so that there is an actual law there. It's called the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act, which forbids fans from singing sectarian and political songs. But the problem again is proving it, taking to court and actually making sure that it is racist, it is offensive, sexist, or whatever. And as we've seen with language, it can be very ambiguous. Alex C. asks, what other examples are there of a team taking a derogatory term used by another team and adopting it, like the Yid Army with Spurs fans? The use of the word Yid, or identification with Jews, is also done at Ajax, Amsterdam. Amsterdam, like that part of London where Spurs comes from, still has a large Jewish population. So, opposing fans of Amsterdam would chant racist, anti-Jewish slogans at the Ajax fans, and they responded in the same way by adopting the name. And you can often see flags at Ajax games, and the flags are the Star of David. I can't think of any other examples exactly like that. Of course, you do have derogatory names being used for sports teams. The obvious one is the Washington Redskins. Cameron asks, how do cultural roles and context play out over the internet? We do not always know where people are posting from, so it could be hard to understand the context of their content. That's very true. And what you do get is a very um, a type of intercultural communication which has its own set of norms to be able to begin to understand what is being said. Of course, you have no idea of the social role of the particular poster, and which removes even more context from trying to understand what is being said. Peter says, what role do Grice's conversational maxims play in implicature? For example, if someone breaks the maximum of relevance, then the listener will be scratching their heads looking for a connection between the two statements and will ultimately arrive at a false conclusion. Well, maybe. It depends on the degree of cooperation. So if there is cooperation, then the speaker will use various elocutionary force indicating devices, that is, particular ways of helping the addressee understand what is being said. Ultimately, with the use of implicature, the speaker wants the other person to understand, but by flouting relevance, they're inviting a particular inference that they don't want to say directly. So you had the example about the teacher wasn't drunk today, okay? And there's an implicature, and the invited inference is that the teacher is usually drunk. Nick says, one thing that kept popping in my head was the concept of double meaning. How is it possible to tell if a statement or action has double meaning? Does double meaning happen because the listener takes what is being said out of context? For example, could Nancy Maine's shirt could absolutely have a double meaning, and that might actually be the case. Well, yeah. One of the things about implicature and innuendo is that there is a literal meaning, and then there is a non-overt meaning. So that allows you to cancel the non-overt meaning. So Nancy Maines can say, "No, I didn't say fuck you, Toby Keith. What I said was freedom, understanding, truth, and knowledge." Okay. Um, one of the problems, of course, is knowing what is the intention of the speaker and whether they are inviting you to take the non-overt meaning. So often it's the case that it might just be coincidental. So, for example, there's a famous example of this. This is a female supporter of Richard Nixon during one of his campaigns, and the slogan was, Nixon's slogan was, Nixon is the one. Okay, well, this particular woman was greeting Nixon getting off an airplane at some campaign stop, and she was decidedly 8, 9 months pregnant, and she was holding a sign saying, Nixon is the one. Well, there's a wonderful double meaning there, but whether it was intended or not is very doubtful. So we have to make decisions all the time about, is the speaker intending a double meaning, or is it just unintentional? Jacob says, how often do you run into double meanings? Well, language is ambiguous. You can often run into double meanings. And have you and your group of friends ever made a double meaning between yourselves? I'm sure you have. And if you're, for example, a parent, you might want to use double meanings to say something that you don't want your children to understand. Mitchell says, does anyone have faith in FIFA after their recent or more recent debacle? Probably not, but it's the only organization we've got, so hopefully it will clean itself up. Probably going to take a few years to do that, though. Michael says, do you think there is certain language or culture that surrounds sporting events that calls the fans to bash the other team players in such a negative way? Well, yeah, I think that's all part of the carnivalesque thrill of going to sporting events, is that you can say outrageous things about the opposing team. But it is meant to be in a carnivalesque situation. That is, people escaping the normal ways of behaving to behave in a very anarchistic way. And it's embedded in culture. If you think of the notion of the fight song, a fight song is supposed to rally the supporters against in support of their team and against the other team. I guess you could say a lot of fight songs are pretty tame, although we still have the notion of a fight song. And of course, there are different versions of fight songs, less formal ones, less official ones, which do reflect the kind of carnivalesque behavior of fans supporting their team and putting down the opposing team. Carl says, can anyone answer number 4? I was thinking about it, and it's hard to come up with an example. And number 4 was, can you give other examples of carnivalesque behavior? Well, we I think we mentioned we talked about the Athens Block Party as being a perfect example of carnivalesque behavior. Okay, so for one day of the year, people can act in very strange and bizarre ways on Court Street and not get arrested. So every society has some kind of way that law-abiding citizens can act for a very short time as not as law-abiding citizens. And football stadiums in Europe tend to be one way of providing this opportunity to behave in these crazy, crazy ways. Jordan says, I've never heard of the term carnivalesque before. I found the concept of it very interesting. I understand why it could be excessive, in bad taste, offensive, and degrading. But is it something out of humor that should be taken lightly? Well, once you understand the context of it, I think you can begin to take it less seriously. So when Nick Hornby's shouting, chanting for his fellow fans to beat up the opposing supporters, to kick their teeth in, or whatever it is, he doesn't really mean it. He really wouldn't be involved in that kind of behavior himself, and so he could claim that that's just hyperbole. But at the same time, certain fans may respond to that and commit terrible acts of violence. So it's on the edge. It's bordering between the acceptable anarchy and unacceptable anarchy. And for the most part, I guess most carnivalesque behavior does not tip over into violence, right? But again, it depends. It depends on the context, and it depends on what's at stake. Okay, thank you for those questions. Keep them coming in, and we'll respond to more of these next time.